I think that to offer some words of encouragement to anyone that might be a nuke or might become a nuke, it's not unusual to go through pretty much the whole pipeline and have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I didn't struggle through prototype, but like I didn't excel. I was just kind of like pushed through with everybody else. But when I was standing my watches as a student, I had no idea what was happening. I would try to like cram study some casualty procedures or like a startup shutdown procedure right before I went in. But there's so much shit that you're trying to learn so quickly that like I couldn't grasp it all. And being an ET, I also had to know about the electric plant, which is nonsense. And at prototype, I had to stand throttleman, which isn't even a thing in the fleet. Well, kind of depends what class of submarine you go to, but like you have to learn so much. All you really have to do is grasp it at a surface level to get through your watches and get your book signed. Like that's fine. I didn't have like an aha moment of like, oh, that's how nuclear power works until I was almost qualified
Yeah.
on the submarine, not at prototype, on the submarine. Like I showed up to the boat and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. If anyone's going through that or went through that or will go through that, like that's okay. I became an above average operator. Everyone does at some point have that aha moment, except for like Joe. But like everyone else gets pretty good at operating at some point. Just kidding, dude.
Dive! Code red and 4 compartment middle level.
Torpedoes in the water!
No, I never have thought I was smart. I thought the people I dealt with were dumb, including you.
There's like some requirement that exists that Rick over said, like you shall stand watch on a nuclear plant before you go to the fleet. I'm sure it exists somewhere. I've definitely heard it somewhere.
So after you finish power school, you pass your comp, you get put on grad hold. After that, then you finally start getting BAH. You can move out into town, probably with roommates, find an apartment or a house or something like that. And you change commands. So you leave NPTC, you go to NPTU, Charleston, if you're a Charleston person, or you go to NPTU Ballston Spa, if you're a New York kind of person.
Welcome to the Nuclear Power Training Unit, Charleston. The Nuclear Power Training Unit is a technical school run by the United States Navy and is a vital part of the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. Our primary mission is to train naval nuclear officers and enlisted personnel and certify them to operate the reactors that power the United States Navy's aircraft carriers and submarines.
When students get there, what does their training look like?
So their training is going to look like they're going to start in an off-crew period. So it's 2 months of learning the basic systems related to nuclear power. After those 2 months of off-crew, they're going to go to their on-crew portion.
So you were off crew for 8 weeks when you first got there, where it was, you basically had a classroom with your rate, and there were staff members whose only job was to give you checkouts. It's very different as a student, because as a student in A school, power school, everything was study, test, study, test. So in prototype, it's a lot different because you get a PQS that requires signatures for everything you need to know to be able to finish prototype. And what you have to do is you have to study what those line items are for, go and find a staff member or somebody who's qualified to sign that for you, and then prove to them that you know enough about that topic for them to give you their signature. And only once your entire book is complete, that's when you're done. There's hundreds and hundreds of signatures in there. So it's more self-paced, because if you're like a whiz on drawing, plant diagrams, you could get those systems checkouts really easy. But if you are more of a watch standard kind of person, hands-on, then your watches are going to go good, but you probably have to spend some more time studying the drawings, the writings, things like that. Once you're done with off crew, you get assigned to your crew, and at that point, you don't really have any staff members whose only job it is to give you checkouts.
They're actually going to learn how to stand watch, how to take logs, how to operate the systems. You know, they learn the basis of the systems. Now they learn how to actually operate it. Casualties associated, startups, shutdowns, all those that are translatable to a fleet boat or a fleet carrier.
Prototype operates on what they call a curve. The curve is the pace at which students must progress through their qualifications in order to graduate on time. Student qualifications are completed by performing a combination of checkouts and practical factors. Checkouts are where a student presents their knowledge about a very specific subject to an instructor. If the instructor deems that the student has an adequate level of knowledge about that subject, they sign their checkout, and the student makes progress against the curve. Practical factors are evolutions that a student must perform, standing X number of watches, observing plant maintenance, etc. The number of hours each student must work outside of their shift's normal working hours depends on their status in relation to the curve.
So a naval nuclear reactor plant has to be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So to do that without having one person or one group of people there 24 hours is they split it up into shifts. You have your 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock, which is your days, your 4 o'clock to midnight, which is your swings, and then your midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, which is your mid shift. So it's a rotating shift work. You'll do 7 days of one shift, you'll get a couple days off, and then you move to the next shift. So you'll go from days to T week. I'll get into that in a little bit. T week to swings. Swings, you'll get literally 48 hours off total. And then you start mids, and from mids you get a few days off, and then you're back to days, and it's just a cycle. It takes 35 days to complete one cycle. T week is just a week that's put in there. It's a 4-day week of just studying and training, no watch standing, followed by a 4-day weekend that's considered your break time, effectively, or your nice 4-day weekends. Go New York City for us, at least. I went to New York City a bunch. Yeah, so you're on shift for the 8 hours. That is your on shift time. And then for students, they have to do 4 hours minimum after or before shift, or split. You can do 2 hours before shift, 2 hours after shift. You just have to get 12 hours a day in for your study time. If you are on the curve, which means you have the required amount of checkouts and you are not behind and you're not super far ahead, you're still at 12 hours. If you're doing really good, you've gotten 1 million checkouts in a day, you're 1 million points ahead, what have you, they can reduce your hours. So either 2 hours a day, so 10 hours total, so either 2 hours before, 2 hours after, what have you, or even the really good ones are going to get put on staff hours, which means 8 hours, and then you go home. It all really depends on the person. And then if you've been doing bad or just not doing well and you need that extra help, you can get put on those extra 2 hours, and you're going to end up doing 14 hours a day. Though that requires you to be 10 to 15% behind. And then it's that schedule repeating until you graduate. You qualify, effectively. You qualify, you do a graduation, and then you go on transfer leave and you go to your boat.
I thought power school was relatively easy. For a while I was on those kind of sucky hours, but honestly, I enjoyed it. But then I got to prototype, and I was like, whoa, this is way different. And it took me a hot minute to adjust to prototype. I don't know if it was the intimidation, but that definitely was there. The first time I went to go ask an instructor for a checkout, I was literally shaking. And this is just a grown up talking to another grown up. And I don't know why I was so nervous, but there's just some weird, this is all throughout the Navy of people just crapping down your throat for no reason. And I just expected that. So it took me a while to adapt to that. And then I just remember the whole time I was just deer in the headlights, oh my gosh, what's going on? I felt like I needed to be tethered to my over instruct and be do everything for me, because I was really nervous. So that it took me I honestly don't think I got over it. And then I just oh, thank God I graduated.
I think the interesting thing about prototype is it's the first time that you ever see an actual reactor plant manual. And you're oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm not just learning the theory of nuclear power, but I'm actually going to go do it. And prototype does a good job of having a lot of simulation areas available. So you can go play maneuvering with with it's not attached to anything. Now you can go play engine room without it being attached to anything. But like that's the first time you're like, oh yeah, I'm actually going to operate a reactor power plant, and I'm 19 years old.
I know the prototype in Charleston has made a lot of changes since I was there. So one thing that I had to do when I was at prototype as an instructor was I had to be like a CDAD type person for someone. So if they had like problems at home or they had financial issues or something like that, on top of me trying to like get them to know the like immense amount of knowledge that they need, I also had to be like a father figure or a brother or whatever, and like hear all their problems and try and help them solve it. And the reason that they have a lot of these problems is because they are like being grown-ups for the first time. So a lot of them are going to be 20 or less years of age, and so they haven't left home. They haven't done like living out on their own. And prototype is the first time where they like have to live out in town. They have to have a car. They have to pay bills and do all this stuff. That's not just like the internet in your barracks room, which for a lot of them, for the first year or so that they're in the Navy, that's like maybe their one bill. Maybe they have a car eventually, but so they're hitting like a lot of life like all at once, for most of them. And there are some that don't, or have been around the block like a little while and don't need that kind of like life help. But for sure, a lot of them do need like that kind of stuff.
The manning requirements of the Navy's prototype training commands are immense. Each plant is broken up into 5 sections of personnel to support the rotating shift work schedule, and each section must be large enough to fully man the watch stations. Coupled with the fact that the nuclear Navy is constantly struggling with retention, there aren't enough qualified nuclear operators who stay in the Navy long enough to complete a sea tour and return to prototype as an instructor for their shore duty afterwards. Therefore, prototype manning is supplemented by recently qualified students, referred to as junior staff instructors or staff pickups.
It changes your path a little bit. So normally when you would finish prototype, you would immediately go to your ship for 48 months, and then you cycle back to shore if you re-enlisted, which most people do, start re-enlist. And then you maybe have like 18 months, 2 years on shore, and then that would be the end of your 8 years. If you got accepted to be a staff pickup, JSI, you would do 2 years at shore at prototype, and then go to a boat and do the rest of your time there. If you star re-enlist, which is required to star re-enlist if you want to be a staff pickup, then that's 6 years from that time. So you do 2 years on shore, and then the last 4 on your boat, unless you re-up again. But basically, what it is, they have a quota. They'll tell you, okay, we need this many of each rate. If you're interested, submit an application. Say, write down your GPAs. Why do you want to do it? It goes through a typical Navy routing process. And then I had an interview with the Command Master Chief. And he just asked me some pretty basic questions. Why do you want to do it? I think he asked me some questions about watch standing principles, to be honest with you. But yeah, it was pretty simple. I think they just base it off of need. They base it off of how many people apply, and they base it off your GPA. So if you have a decent GPA and they need your rate, you probably have a good chance of getting it, to be honest with you. Some people really wanted it, but for their class at that time, there was no quota. So you're off to the fleet. I got lucky enough that they needed electricians right around the time that I graduated. I had a good enough GPA, so I got picked up. And that's what I did. I did 2 years as a staff member.
When you're a student at prototype, everyone that's a staff member kind of treats you like lesser. And that's kind of how it's set up. You're a student. That's how it's going to be. However, I will tell you that if you're watching this and you're a student at Prototype, or you're going to be, staff pickups are shit. And in like 8 months, you're going to out-qualify them. And if you went back to Prototype, you could haze the fuck out. They don't know goddamn anything. They suck. There are exceptions. There are good staff pickups, but the staff pickups that think that they're hot shit because they're staff pickups can get absolutely fucked. As a person who's currently a student, when you get to the boat, you will immediately realize that those kids don't know goddamn anything. And everyone at Prototype talks about and treats the fleet like it's this big scary thing. It isn't. The fleet is the only place where you like have a life and free time. And like, yeah, it sucks. It can suck a lot, but you get to be so much more knowledgeable. You get to learn so much more shit, so much cool shit. You get to actually see things. And Spoos haven't done any of that shit at all. They have been a student only. So don't listen to them. They don't know fucking anything. If there was enough sea returnees to fully man Prototype, do you think that it would be a net positive or a net negative to not have staff pickups anymore for the nuclear Navy?
That's a difficult question. I think if I really had to give you an answer to that, I would say that it is probably not a net positive to have JSI's staff pickups.
So you think it'd be better for the Navy if that didn't exist?
I think it would be better if it didn't exist, you'd have to have more sea returnees. But if you can give me that, then you can get rid of staff pickups for sure. The only time I think that one of the very few benefits I think it gives to the students is you've got somebody who's more willing to help them. A lot of the sea returnees are not fucking around with bullshit, to put it, pardon my French, but a lot of sea returnees, they're bitter, they're jaded, they don't want to be there in the first place. If somebody's needing a lot of extra help, there's very few staff members that you're going to find who give a shit enough to actually help. JSI's staff pickups, they could be more willing to help. They're more recently from the pipeline, so they may be able to explain it in a way that a sea returnee can't. They could like bridge the gap between the knowledge the sea returnee has and the way the student is thinking. Because likely that student is thinking the way this student just recently thought about it. And so they can be like, okay, yeah, I used to think that exact same thing, but here's what actually flipped that switch for me. The specific word or the specific phrase. Sometimes that unlocks things for students where they're like, oh shit, okay, yeah, got it. The sea returnee is talking fleet language, which sometimes just doesn't break that barrier to get into the student's brain. But that's probably the one benefit that you'd lose if you got rid of JSI.
After coming off of the boat, you had to qualify to be an instructor. What was that like?
It is reading on the plant training manual. It basically tells you exactly like how to give a checkout and what to ask for a checkout. It's not just like you qualify your watch station, of course, you qualify the plant, and then you qualify, all right, now this is how you actually interact with a student.
Here at NPTU Charleston, we train the next generation of nuclear-powered submarine operators and aircraft carrier operators.
So on a day-to-day basis, we're covering training students to have the proper level of knowledge and then the operational wherewithal to operate the U.S. Navy's nuclear reactors both underwater and on top of water. Training the fleet to make sure that the U.S. is in its best strategic position. So it's teaching students all the knowledge they need to know so that when things happen, they know how to properly react to them.
So on a day-to-day basis, my job is comprised of teaching students how to operate our nuclear reactors here at Charleston. So that could be out on the physical plant, like giving them instruction that way, or giving them what we call checkouts, checking up on their knowledge of the systems that we have.
What value do you gain being an instructor at Prototype?
I have always, for most of my life, I've always wanted to be a teacher of some sort. I've liked teaching students, teaching the junior guys. When I was on the boat, I was the qualifications guy. So I was in charge of the junior sailor qualifications. So when they got their fish, I was in charge of that as they qualified through the nuclear field portions. I was in charge of that. So it was really nice to be able to be a core aspect of why someone qualified and how they have the knowledge that they have. It's because of me. I take pride in that.
You learn a lot about your systems in kind of a more in-depth way than you do necessarily on the boat, because you're teaching it every day, and you teach it over and over and over again. So you get a really in-depth knowledge on the theory, which is stressed pretty heavily at prototype, since the system-specific stuff may change from boat to boat. So you get really smart on that kind of stuff. You also gain how to you learn those teaching skills of walking someone through from not knowing anything about how something works to them at least understanding the basics of how something works and being able to grow them into someone who can get to that mastery level of, okay, I understand how to take apart this entire system and put it all back together when they get to the fleet. But you're giving them the building blocks at prototype, but you really gain a big amount of experience in teaching people, because on the boat, that's not necessarily your number one goal day to day is teaching. But at prototype, that's your 100% of your job for most people. There are some people that don't, but for a lot of people, that is 100% of your job is teaching. And everything from standing watch to taking logs to somewhat doing maintenance is a teaching moment. And then specifically teaching where they're coming and getting a checkout from you, where it's very one-on-one or two-on-one, where you're seeing what they do know and then trying to get them to what the acceptable level of knowledge is for that.
So do you think that students' time at prototype is valuable, or do you think that they would be as good if they went straight from a school to a boat?
I think it can be valuable.
They would definitely be on the struggle bus. But taking logs, standing watch, that's all something that everyone should learn before they get to a boat, because you're going to be doing that a lot on the boat.
Going directly to a boat straight from power school, I think would be a really hard transition to, okay, now I have to go underway. I have to stand watch for the first time, which I have no idea about. I have to know how to what to bring on an underway. There's just a multitude of things that going from power school to fleet would, on top of what you gain at prototype, if you didn't have that, getting that all on the boat is, I think, going to be really hard for people if this ever did happen. And it would put a lot of stress on the people who are qualified on the boat to they would really have to mentor and guide these new guys way more than they necessarily have to now. Because when we get new guys now, I'm okay, here's your qual cards. These are the ones you need to focus on. So get to it and go get checkouts.
Why do you think it is that nukes couldn't figure it out without prototype, but everyone else does?
Well, I mean, the consequences of nukes not being able to figure it out from the get-go is really high, and having that vast amount of knowledge that you need to gain without really knowing kind of the process of what it looks like in the fleet, in an environment that fosters we're here to help you and help you learn and get you to the point where you need to be for the fleet. But when you leave power school, that is not where you're at. And you can see that when you get to a boat for the nuke rates, getting their fish done, their warfare qual. That's a thing that all rates on a submarine have to do. And nukes generally will excel at doing that compared to other rates, because they do know how to go get checkouts from people that they don't know and learn about stuff that they haven't seen before or isn't specifically like their rate. So like we get a big leg up on that because we do have prototype. But if we came straight from power school, that would not be the case. And we would be on a more level playing field with that type of qual specifically. So I think there is a lot of value in going to prototype.
Do you think that there are improvements that need to be made with the pipeline?
So I think probably the single most important aspect that would need to be addressed is you somehow have to get the staff to buy in, especially at prototype. Right? Because prototype especially is just a giant social experiment. So your staff will make or break your experience and will make or break whether you actually get something positive out of it. Like take my own personal example. Like I got there in 2016 or 2015. Yeah, 2015 after Qual Apocalypse, where nobody could get fucking checkouts. So literally the entire base staff did not give a fuck about us. So we just sat around for 12 hours, just twiddling our thumbs, accomplished nothing, and then would go home. In fact, it got so bad, I had to like restart because we got so backed up, right? So it took me like a full year to get, not a full year, a little less than a full year to get through prototype. But even once like people were able to start giving checkouts, like that resentment and that like hatred of all the bullshit the staff had to go through was carrying over. So like, even though people could give you checkouts, they just straight up wouldn't. So it it was kind of like a self-feeding cycle where everybody's just mad at everybody, nothing ever gets done. It's improved quite a lot since then. But that first and foremost has to be changed because when staff care and will actually, put in the effort to help students, students will actually learn something valuable to carry over to the fleet. And the way you do that, well, one is just first and foremost will always be manning. Like until we somehow solve the nuke manning problem that perpetually always exists, that will always be, hurdle number one. But two, just the work life cycle for staff, which has been getting better. I don't know if I would call it great yet because I wasn't an instructor. I did repair, so I was a vastly different schedule than instructors. But now the way they do it is you do like 2 years on crew and then only like 1 year off crew training group. So like you're not on the boat, right? You just do classroom stuff, which is definitely an improvement, but it still doesn't really get over the fact of that resentment of, you just did a sea tour and you've basically come back to do another sea tour, except your boat just doesn't ever pull out. But you do this exact same stupid bullshit 24/7. But having been in repair, so like on the outside looking in, like I could already see the night and day difference between when I was a student there and when I came back in 2020.
I agree with a lot of Joe's points. I think Manning, and the quality of life, I guess you could say, for the staff, because it's not a fun job. It could be very frustrating training students who are actively trying to get you disqualified or break something or hurt themselves, accidentally hurt themselves. The other thing is that for a lot of the sea returnees, the going to prototype is like their twilight tour. Um, it's hard to get people to keep sprinting until the final, until the finish line on their twilight tour. A lot of people, they're already looking forward to the next thing, right? They're thinking about jobs, they're thinking about where they're going to move, they're thinking about their kids' school year start and stop time. When you've got a staff instructor who's distracted by getting out of the Navy, they are not going to be as fully invested as maybe you would want at your training commands. I think prototype has gotten a lot better though. They added so many more quality of life things to the Charleston prototype. I know.
With anywhere there are improvements that could be made. There are definitely days when I was a student that I would sit around and there would be no one available to give me any checkouts that I was ready for. So that can be A, really frustrating, and B, like there's only so much studying that you can do to get ready for the next thing before you like actually just get something signed and get it marked off so you can like, okay, now I can mentally focus on the next thing. So there are times like that, and as a instructor I tried to make that like time available to students as much as possible. So if I did turn them away, I didn't just say like, no, I don't have time for you. I'd say, I'm doing this thing right now. If you come back in an hour, I should have time for you. And so that way they're not feeling like, okay, this guy's just blowing me off. He's like actually busy. When I come back later, he'll be able to give me a checkout. So fostering that kind of culture where like people don't just get turned away because people are having a bad day or whatever the instructors might be going through as well. Like that would, I think, help people not get discouraged, because that definitely happens a lot, in my opinion, where people just get like beat down by the long days and the like really like large number of things that they have to like go do that seems insurmountable at the beginning. But I also think that there's a lot that could be cut down that is not necessary for every rate to go through, and like maybe just officers need like the whole breadth of what prototype is right now. But in the fleet right now, like we are cutting down qual cards to like really, really bare minimum levels, and trusting that, okay, if you are qualified under this card, you are actually minimum safe, and like you are not done learning. There is a lot to still gain, and I think prototype could take some of that and cut down what people are required to learn before they leave. Because at the end of the day, I pretty much just want them to be able to do like their senior rate watch at a like moderate proficiency by the time that they leave. But we get so much other stuff that I don't really need them to learn while they're there. So I think cutting down their qual cards could be a big improvement. So those are kind of my two ideas to improve, which I think they have made good strides at. I haven't personally witnessed them, but I've heard a lot of good things are happening down at at least the Charleston prototype right now. So they have like emotional support animals come in where you can just like go see a dog for fucking 15 minutes, and the like see dad role is like a job now. Like that guy will or girl will have like a class of people, and they'll meet them in power school, and they'll follow them through their entire time at prototype as their like mentor for like all their problems. So that way like none of the stuff that like an instructor who's like teaching and giving checkouts, like they don't need to be distracted by like, oh, Timmy's having a bad day because his girlfriend broke up with him. They can just, okay, go talk to your staff advisor and he'll like take care of that for you. And that person is their entire job is to just take care of those problems. So I think that has alleviated a lot of the burden on the instructor. But also like the student knows like this person is my person. So like if I go to him or her, then they're going to help me with this problem. They're not going to be distracted by like standing watch or giving checkouts or whatever.
There are a lot of things in the qual card that don't need to be in there. I saw it in the fleet. The for like 3.5 years after being on board, they were like, yeah, we're going to cut down all the qual cards. So things like our roving watch card got stripped from like 300 signatures down to 15 signatures. What happens is things go wrong or things break or someone does something dumb on the boat. And so they add that checkout into the qual card as something to talk about instead of having, like, I'm sure you've seen, like, discuss incident reports associated with this watch. Like, they bring individual issues into each qual card, and then over the years, you add 100, 200, 300 signatures into a card that just don't need to be there. So it took Big Navy to be like, whoa, pump the brakes. There's too many here. So they cut it down. It happened with roving watch, engine watch supervisor, shutdown reactor dropper, all the things, engine room supervisor, what have you. And the same thing needs to happen with prototype. It hasn't happened yet. My engine watch supervisor card was a little over 1,000 signatures for engine watch supervisor. It should not take 6 months to qualify, but it does. So as far as improvement at prototype, signature numbers need to come down by a lot.
Just to be clear, you're talking about for staff?
For staff and students, I vaguely remember as a student, there were a bunch of ridiculous checkouts in there as well. That probably didn't need to be in there.
Well, here's what I would do. I would shorten the nuke pipeline by like a half. I would cut not almost all. I would cut a lot of the curriculum that you have to learn in power school. A school is fine because it is where you learn like your in-rate stuff, like that stuff you do actually use at some point. But like power school, you waste a week learning how to draw a nuclear power plant that isn't going to be one you ever see again. You learn way, way, way in-depth knowledge about like chemistry and radcon. And like the mechanics learn way too much reactor theory, and the ETs learn way too much like chemical or chemistry shit. Like it's just so the wells of knowledge that are forced down your throat at power school go so fucking deep, and there's no reason to. The only reason that it does, well, there's a couple. It's to say that you're certified and you know all this shit. They basically took a 4-year course and slammed it together into a 1-year training pipeline. But you don't have to do that because you don't actually get a certification. It's bullshit. It doesn't mean anything. You're not getting a degree. And you never have to know most of that shit ever again. And so it becomes like a filter where like if you're not very good at memorizing and regurgitating immediately afterwards, then we don't want you. But that isn't the case. You want people that aren't good at that because they're going to be good at other shit like operating an actual fucking reactor plant. So I would cut a lot of the curriculum out of power school and I would combine it with prototype so that you can have less staff overall training new nukes. And I would get rid of, I don't know why they haven't done this before. I would have 0 actual nuclear power plants anywhere at a training school. Like there's no reason for it not to all be simulation. And there's no reason to treat it like it's real if it isn't. You don't have to have staff there 24/7. You don't have to have fucking operational reactor safeguards exams. You don't have to pitch to a city and a state, can we please have a new reactor power plant in this location because there's no pro-nuclear power party. You get rid of all that fucking shit. And you just have a simulation. You can have as many buildings as you want running a simulator at the same time. And because it's not real, you can let staff and students fuck it up and like operate incorrectly to see what happens. Because one thing you never get to learn is like, well, what happens if I do it wrong? And then you never get to recognize that, like, oh, something's actually broken because I just broke it. You never get that. And so if it happens to you in real life, oh, well, now you just, release fission products into the environment or cause a steam line rupture or some horrible casualty that you've never even seen before. Whereas if it was all pretend and that you didn't have to actually answer to a nuclear power commission or naval reactors, then you could just fuck around and like actually teach people about here's what you do and here's what you don't do instead of just talking about it or reading about it in a book. So that's what I would do. Obviously, that's just never going to happen because Rickover said so. And it's been around for 60 fucking years without an incident. And so you can't really argue with the track record, but that's how I would change it.
Well, the craziest thing is they have the ERT, so they have like part of a simulated engine room, and there's like 4 fucking fighties there. I don't know if they're all.
Yeah, so that's another kind of dumbass thing about naval reactors and naval nuclear power is at the fake maneuverings where they simulate how a reactor plant reacts to what watchlanders do in maneuvering. you still aren't allowed to just fuck it up. You can't go in there and be like, hey, can we just shim out forever and see what happens? No, you still get in trouble for that. That's crazy. Those environments should be used to like mess around and like work the kinks out and figure out what actually does happen if we screw around. And let's see that, and let's play it out, and let's see if we would release fission products. Let's see if we would lose all electrical power. Like all that shit should be taken advantage of. Like when I was a very senior reactor operator, and it was time for me to go to the FIDE to do a fucking drill set, I still was like anxious. That's crazy. It's a goddamn video game, but they take it so fucking seriously, and you have to brief it like just like you're on a real boat, and they do that so it like adds simulation value, but like you never get to practice. You never get to practice doing your job. And I guess some people would say that there's a point to that. I think that, I mean, I've never done anything in life that I haven't been able to practice first. It's crazy.
Well, I was going to say that I would be drinking the Kool-Aid because I was like, oh, it wasn't that bad to begin with. But I really do agree with Kenny's idea of practice. Because, I mean, you're right. Even as a senior watchstander, I was like paranoid that I was going to do something wrong because I had never done it wrong, thankfully. But that was because I was like crapping myself the whole time, like, oh, don't mess this up. So yeah, being able to practice that would be super clutch. Even if it was just like a few times. Doesn't have to be like super routine. So yeah, I mean, our pipeline is shorter than yours already by 3 months. So I literally went from day one of A school to the boat in like 1 year, 10 months. I was fast. And I still have like a long T-track time. So I still got pretty quick. But yeah, I do think that simulated training would be massive. And I know they have it now at Charleston, but I don't know to what extent.
Yeah, they probably still take that shit seriously.
Yeah, that is dumb.
Oh, I have the watch. Dude, why? Why do you have the watch? This shit's fucking fake. I have the watch, bitch.